It is my great privilege to welcome you to JCRC's 2023 Community-Wide Yom Ha'Shoah Commemoration. Today we fulfill our sacred obligation to the 6 million Jews who perished during the Holocaust, to the survivors who experienced unimaginable suffering and hardship, and to all those whose fierce and heroic battle against tyranny liberated the world from oppression. Today we remember and honor Zachor. But the memory of the Shoah charges us to do more. Today, as we mourn the past with Holocaust eyewitnesses and their descendants, we commit to guard and to protect. Shamar. We bear witness to the sanctity of each life, even as we watch a dangerous increase in anti-Semitism and other forms of hatred erupt in our communities. What happens to any of us happens to all of us. Today and every day, we pledge to rise up as defiant and righteous warriors against evil and injustice. We vow to battle intolerance and indifference as we wield our powerful weapons of history and faith, moving away from hatred and towards dignity and peace. Rabbi Hillel calls out to us from across the ages, in a world where there is no humanity, strive to be human. And echoing just as urgently, if not now, when? It is an honor to serve on JCRC's Holocaust Commission with incredibly dedicated community leaders who are moved and motivated by the legacy of that terror-filled time. JCRC works tirelessly to promote and strengthen Holocaust memory and education throughout the Greater Washington area's schools, civic organizations, and public and private agencies. We advocate for more vigorous and effective public policy responses to anti-Semitism and all forms of otherism. And through JCRC's legislative priorities, we press for expanded funding for social service assistance to physically and financially vulnerable Holocaust survivors. Many thanks to my Northern Virginia Holocaust Commission co-chair, Ira Bartfield, Maryland Holocaust Commission co-chairs Dr. Ron Paul and Albert Bloomfield, JCRC Executive Director Ron Halber, JCRC Education Director Sarah Winkleman, Janice Rosenblatt, who coordinated today's program, and the entire JCRC staff and leadership for their unwavering commitment to affirm Jewish life in the past, now, and always. Most especially, my heartfelt gratitude to those who experienced the Holocaust firsthand and your families. You are our best role models of courage and resilience. As you continue to choose life, you inspire us to live with meaning and purpose, to remember and honor, to guard and protect. May your reclaimed lives, shining through us, be a beacon of hope for all the people who share our world. Thank you.
Hello. I'd like to thank the JCRC of Greater Washington for giving us the honor of opening the program this year to honor the Shoah. So I'm a rabbi in Northern Virginia. I'm also the grandchild of 2 Holocaust survivors. Today, I want to share with you the story of someone who didn't survive. My great-grandfather, Paul Neukircher. He was born in 1876 in Erstinghausen, a Catholic farming village in Westphalia, Germany. The Neukirchers had settled out there at least a century prior to that, invited along with other Jews to settle the hinterlands and to become citizens of the newly forming German nation. They were asked to speak German, to take on German names. They learned how to code shift, how to blend in, how to hide their Jewishness. And Paul Neukircher had mastered the assimilation game. By 1900, you see, the Neukirchers were the last family left who was Jewish in that town. People there spoke of them as Jewish, but different. Paul was a civic leader. He ran the men's choir for many years. He fought for Germany in World War I and was celebrated as a war hero. The Neukirchers decorated their store for the Feast of Corpus Christi every year, and they helped out local girls who didn't have a dowry to get married. This made them Jewish, but different. And then the Nazis came to power, even all the way out in sleepy little Erstinghausen. When the pogroms of Kristallnacht erupted in 1938, both my grandmother and her sister had already left. Paul and his wife Adele were now the only two Jews left in that town. Paul was forced to close the family store, to give up his living, and then eventually also to give up their home. The pogroms spared the Neukircher homestead because at that point it was someone else's property. However, Kristallnacht wasn't over. The very next day, 30,000 Jewish men were detained and deported to temporary internment camps. My great-grandfather was one of them. He was held for 17 days and then released home after that. This was a test. What were the people in his town going to do when this pillar of their community, who supplied their farms and fought their fires and led the choir and supported the poor, what were they going to do when he was taken away? What would they say? Apparently, nothing. They said nothing, not in Erstinghausen, nor anywhere else across Germany. Nothing. And that silence gave the Nazis just enough encouragement to keep going, to pursue what eventually became known as the final solution. 4 years later, in July 1942, my great-grandparents got their deportation orders. Everybody knew about it. The townspeople actually came out to say goodbye to them, but no one tried to stop it. No one tried to hide them or to help them escape. Paul and Adele were whisked away on a train, and within 8 months, they were dead. This story always haunts me when I tell it. It reminds me that genocide doesn't happen overnight. It builds quietly over time, and that makes it much harder to see it coming, to escape it, or to resist. Their story also inspires my gratitude that this country was willing to take in my grandparents as refugees, to give them a chance to survive, to find a living here, and eventually for their granddaughter to become a leader in her own community as a rabbi. Unfortunately, at a time when anti-Semitism is also prevalent. A granddaughter who's proud of her Judaism, who has nurtured caring and respectful interfaith relationships, but who's also determined not to let people call and be called Jewish, but different. Thank you.
We are honored to be led in the candle lighting by survivors of our local community, as well as second and third generation survivors and representatives from the Israeli government. Through the lighting of 6 candles in honor of the 6 million Jews who perished in the flames of the Shoah, we fulfill the commandment of remembrance. We hope that today's program brings meaning and comfort to all the participants. The Jewish people's vibrancy and resilience in the face of destructive evil compels us not only to look to the past in mourning and reverence, but also to look ahead to an even brighter future, committing ourselves to pursuing a world that is less broken, with greater justice, compassion, and peace.
It is our sacred obligation to remember the 6 million Jews murdered during the Holocaust, to honor the Holocaust survivors, and to remember the heroism and sacrifice of those who liberated our people and the world from brutal tyranny. Today, we come together to honor the resilience of the survivors who demonstrated their fortitude in the face of unimaginable evil. Their commitment to continue to share their legacies through presentations and speaking engagements, even when they cannot attend in-person events, is an inspiration to us all. Simultaneously, the JCRC has intensified its collaboration with the children and adult grandchildren of survivors, who are beginning to assume the mantle of responsibility for carrying on their families' legacies. We are grateful for their commitment.
My name is Ruth Ellenberg Eisenberg. I'm a Holocaust survivor volunteering at the Holocaust Museum. I'm lighting this candle in memory of my parents, Hersh and Fega Epstein, and my 2 sisters, Malka and Miriam Epstein, and my brother Yitzchak Epstein. And whoever I can remember as my father's brother was David, with his wife Rivka, and his kids Shaiki and Esther. There's many, many more, but there's too many for me to remember as a 6-7-year-old child. So I just want to dedicate this to anybody in my family, and I just cannot speak. It's very heartbreaking, but this is important that we keep speaking and telling our stories. So I hope this reaches somebody out there and it will make a difference. So I just hope and pray that times get a little better and that we can live a little bit more at peace.
My name is Mira Elkan. I was born in Odessa in 1939 in Ukraine. And when the war began, my mother went to organize a pension because my father was killed at the war with Finland, and met a Russian officer who helped the whole family to evacuate to Tashkent. And I lived in Tashkent from 1941 till 1990. And now I'm very happy that I live in the United States, but I'm very sad that there is a war in Ukraine, and the Ukrainian people have the same faith as the Jewish people. I have a lot of friends there. I have no family there, but I'm very sad, and every morning I get up and want to see this monster Putin to be dead, because he is worse than Hitler. He's Hitler number 2. It's very sad that I spent my 50 years in the Soviet Union, and now there is a war on the same land where I was born. And what else can I say? My mother's sister was killed. She didn't evacuate, and she was sent to a concentration camp with her 2 children, with her boy and the girl that was born. And she was killed in 1940. In 1944, she was sent to a concentration camp. And 2 of my mother's brothers were killed at the beginning of the war. That's all what I had to say, to tell. And now I want to light a candle for the memory of the family that was killed during the war.
My name is Rachel Leah Rappaport Miller. I am lighting this memorial candle as a member of the Generations After, one of the sponsoring organizations of today's commemoration. Our members are children of survivors and include our cherished survivors and other generations. My father was from Radom, Poland, and my mother was from Bielsko, Poland. Their families lived very different Jewish lives. My father's family were Orthodox Jews, traditional, and storekeepers, while my mother's had acculturated and were more upper-class Poles. If not for the war, they surely would never have met. But in 1939, when the Nazis declared war on Poland, both their lives changed. My teenage father, Israel Rappaport, was in the Radom ghetto with his family. Later, he was in several concentration camps, once escaped from cattle cars, and finally ended in Auschwitz before the death march to Buchenwald. His father, 2 brothers and sisters survived the war, a miracle. His mother, Rachel Leah, for whom I named, and younger brother Chaim were killed by the Nazis. Neighbors told the family that Rachel refused to report to work because her son was very ill. Both were shot. When the sirens that went off on September 1st, 1939, turned out to be the beginning of the war, my mother, Emily Garbin, was 15 years old. Her father gave each of the family members gems and sent them in different directions, hoping some would survive the bombing and tanks. My mother never saw her family again. She used her gems for food, for false papers, and for an appendectomy while she was hiding as Christian in the Lodz ghetto. At some point, she was in Theresienstadt and eventually marched back into Germany. She only knew of her family that her father had died on a train. The rest of the family vanished. My parents met on a train platform after the war when my father was running away from the Russians. They were married at a DP camp, by an American chaplain. Because my father had tuberculosis, my parents were sent to Mittenwald, a mountain town in Bavaria where I was born in 1948. I would also like to remember my very dear Aunt Goldie Wexler Rappaport. She spent all her life with profound guilt because her mother and baby sister were taken from the Lodz ghetto to their deaths just one day after she was brought to hide with a Christian woman. She was only 6, but as she said goodbye, she knew she would never see them again. For all the Jewish people who lost their lives or family members during the Shoah, I wish to light this candle.
I am Nelson Blitz, and my parents, David and Rose Blitz, were Polish Holocaust survivors. My father, David, was 17 years old, and my mother, Rose, was 14 when the Nazis invaded Poland and captured the town of Czestochowa in western Poland, where they grew up. My father's parents, Noach, for whom I'm named, and Esther, had 8 children. My father and his older brother, Isaac, and 6 girls, Sarah, Pesa, Zelda, Rosa, Sima, and Hannah. My grandfather Noach was a shoemaker and provided services to the many Catholic pilgrims who visited Czestochowa and the largest Catholic cathedral in Eastern Europe. At a young age, my father learned and had an aptitude for repairing machines in my grandfather's shop and progressed to doing the same for many other local merchants at the time when things were usually repaired and not thrown away and replaced. When the Nazis captured Czestochowa, their house was taken over by the Nazi army, and the family evicted, forced to the ghetto created by the Nazis to imprison the Jews. My grandfather, my father, and his brother were forced into slave labor, were no longer allowed to make money, and their Polish money taken and replaced with a currency that can only be used in that ghetto. My grandfather continued to repair and fix shoes, but for the Nazi soldiers and for free, and only received ration cards that did not provide sufficient food to feed the family. My father was forced to work in a munitions factory and was also enslaved and not paid. His expertise as a machinist saved his life, as his skill set was needed by the Nazis. Here's a photo of my father outside the munitions factory wearing the Star of David on his sleeve. In September 1942, 3 years after the invasion of the Nazis, the morning after Yom Kippur, the Nazis rounded up many of the Jews in Czestochowa, forced them into trains bound for the Treblinka death camp, never to be seen again. Among those murdered were my father's mother and father and his 6 sisters. All that was left was him, his brother, Isaac, and his first cousin, Wolf. My mother, Rose's brother, and her mother were also on the trains the same day to be murdered in Treblinka. My mother's father, Ephraim Herschel Eigenberg, a sister Paula, and a brother Mendel survived that action. My grandfather, Ephraim Herschel, on my mother's side, was a decorated Polish cavalry officer from the wars with Russia immediately after World War I. His 3 brothers immigrated to the United States in the early 1920s as Ephraim Herschel decided to stay in Poland due to his status as a Polish officer. He was a strong man and was a generation older than most of the other Jewish slave laborers who were not shipped to the death camps. This is a photo of my grandfather, Ephraim Herschel Eigenberg. My parents endured almost 6 horrific years of slave laborers, with subsistence food rations, living in buildings and then barracks with little or no heat. In late 1944 and early 1945, the Soviet Union was advancing, liberating the camps in Poland. Only 2 days before the Soviets liberated Czestochowa in January 1945, my grandfather Ephraim Herschel and my uncle Mendel were jammed into the trains by the Nazis and were brought to the Buchenwald concentration camp in Germany to continue the labors. Here is a train manifest where my grandfather and my uncle were shipped to Buchenwald. My grandfather's name is circled. From there's other train manifests indicating my grandfather, Ephraim Herschel, was transported to Theresienstadt concentration camp, and from there the trail ended. He was lost to his family. Out of 8 siblings in my father's family, 2 survived. None of my father's uncles or aunts survived. Out of the 15 to 20 first and second cousins, 1 first cousin survived. My mother lost both her parents and at least one uncle and many cousins, but my parents survived. This is a photo of my parents in post-war Europe. As a result of being sponsored by one of my grandfather's brothers that I referred to previously, who came to the United States in the 1920s, Abe Eisenberg, my parents obtained a visa to come to the United States 4 years after the end of the war to settle in Baltimore. They had 2 sons, myself and my brother Hal Blitz, who lives in Potomac, Maryland, and 5 grandchildren. This candle is in memory of the family members and all others who were murdered in the Holocaust and all who survived.
Hello, I'm Noonie Reddig, representing 3GDC, the grandchildren of Holocaust survivors in Washington, D.C. Today I light this candle to remember my grandmother, Reisel Reddig Vinselberger. She was born in 1912 in Warsaw, Poland, and survived the war in Russia, first in slave labor camps in Siberia, and then in Uzbekistan. She survived alongside with my father, who was a baby at the time, and her kid sister. She lost a huge extended family and network of friends and everybody that she knew. She was the only adult from the before times to survive from her world. I think about her a lot because I only knew her as a child, and what I remember most were the deep wrinkles in her face that held many memories that I'll never know because she never talked about the before times. But she was famous for her sponge cake, for beating 12 eggs with a single fork, and she was also famous for her jelly donuts, her soufganiot that she made in Hanukkah. Today, I remember her, and I remember everybody else who is lost. Thank you.
Shalom. My name is Sosan Chazon, and I'm the Minister for Public Diplomacy at the Embassy of Israel in Washington, D.C. Today, more than ever, it is vital to remember the horrors of the Shoah. Yom Ha'Shoah is the annual day of commemoration to remember and honor the millions of Jewish victims and survivors of Nazism. Today I'm thinking of Hannah Eris, who survived the Shoah and settled in Haifa. Hannah became my adoptive grandmother. She introduced me since a very early age to my love of classical music and literature. While she never spoke about the Shoah, I still remember seeing the identification number tattooed on her wrist from her time in the Nazi concentration camps. Now, more than ever, we need to elevate and promote the voices and stories of survivors like Hannah's to combat Holocaust distortion and raise awareness of anti-Semitism through educational programs in schools. To teach about the Holocaust is to protect the voices and memory of the survivors. Especially now as we see and we are witnessing a rise of anti-Semitism across the United States and the world. I light this candle in memory of my adoptive grandmother Hannah and all Holocaust victims. Yehi zichram baruch.
I call on my fellow Holocaust survivors to stand in unity with me, as you are able, as we recite the legacy of the survivors. We take this oath. We take it in the shadows of flames, whose tongues scar the soul of our people. We vow in the name of our dead parents and children. We vow with our sadness hidden, our faith renewed. We vow we shall never let the sacred memory of our perished 6 million brethren be forgotten or erased. We saw them hungry, in fear. We saw them in loneliness of night. We saw them at the threshold of death, true to their faith. We received their silence in silence. We merged their tears with ours. We are the remaining witnesses of deportations, executions, mass graves, death camps, mute prayers, hidden souls, and cries of revolt. The young, the old, the rich, the poor. The ghetto fighters, the partisans, the scholars, and the messianic dreamers, the tradesmen and businessmen, the Hasidim and Misnachdim. Like a cloud we saw them vanish. We take this oath. Vision becomes word to be handed down from father to son, from mother to daughter, handed down from generation to generation. Zachor, remember what the Nazi murderers and their accomplices did to our Jewish people. Remember them with rage and contempt. Remember what an indifferent world did to us and to itself. We also must remember the good deeds of the righteous Gentiles. In 1981, we took this oath in Israel near the Kotel. There we handed down a legacy to our children in the shadows of the flames of 6 symbolic candles. Tonight, at this assembly, we reaffirm our oath in the shadows of the flames of these 6 yahrzeit candles, honoring the memory of our 6 million. Achenu b'nei Yisrael, our Jewish brethren, we take this oath. Our memory will become words, words of history of the Holocaust to be handed down from generation to generation. Midor ledor. Unsere Kedushim, mir fehlen euch keinmal nicht vergessen.
I call on all children of Holocaust survivors to stand in unity with me, as you are able, as we recite the Pledge of Acceptance. We, who are your sons and daughters, belong to a generation in which every attempt was made for us to never exist. We, who represent your victory and triumph over evil of unthinkable dimensions, accept the responsibility to preserve and protect the legacy of the Holocaust. We pledge to commemorate. We pledge to educate. We pledge to forever remember. We pledge to you, our mothers and fathers, who suffered in ways which words cannot describe, that our commitment is an everlasting commitment for this generation and for every generation to come. We dedicate this pledge to our beloved grandmothers and grandfathers who never lived to see us. We dedicate this pledge to our aunts, uncles, cousins, brothers and sisters who are forever missing from our lives. We dedicate this pledge to all the 6 million Jewish men, women, and children who were so brutally murdered, but who will always be in our thoughts and in our hearts.
I call on all grandchildren of Holocaust survivors to stand in unity with me as you are able, as we recite the Pledge of Continuation. We, who are your grandchildren, will carry on the survivors' legacy to prove to ourselves and to others that we can carry on your victory, as well as to memorialize those loved ones who perished in the Holocaust. We pledge to always remember who we are, where we came from, and the trauma our grandparents endured and survived. To educate people of all ethnic, religious, and cultural groups about our grandparents' experiences. To commit to use lessons of the Holocaust to support justice, tolerance, peace, kindness, and compassion, and to accept survivors' memories and to pass them on to future generations.
We invite you to rise at this time, physically and or spiritually, for the El Malei Rachamim, the memorial blessing in memory of the 6 million. El Malei Rachamim, Shochein B'Meromim, Hametzeh Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei HaShekhinah, V'malot Kedoshim Utorim, Kezohar Rakia Mazirim, Lenishmot Kol Achinu B'nei Yisrael, Shenitbechu V'Shoah, Anashim Nashim V'Taf, Shenechneku V'Shenisrefu V'Shenehergu Shemasru et nafsham al kiddush Hashem v'gan Eden tehi menuchatam. Ana Balarachamim Hastirem V'seter Kanafecha L'olamim Utzror B'tzror HaChaim Et Nishmotehem Adonai Hu Nachalatam V'yanuchu V'shalom al mishkavotehem v'nomar Amen.
Exalted, compassionate God, grant perfect peace in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure, whose radiance is like the heavens, to the souls of all the men and women and children of the house of Israel who were slaughtered, strangled, and burned in the Shoah. May they rest in paradise. Master of mercy, may they find eternal shelter beneath your sheltering wings, and may their souls be bound up in the bond of life. Adonai is their portion. May they rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. Amen.
It is my honor and privilege to introduce our distinguished keynote speaker, Dr. Alfred Munzer, child Holocaust survivor, community leader, public speaker, and humanitarian. Dr. Munzer was born in The Hague, Netherlands, the youngest of 3 children. The Netherlands were already under Nazi occupation. When it became clear that the child needed to be sent away to be protected, their parents put them in hiding. His 2 sisters were eventually separated from Al, and they perished in Auschwitz. Al was in the care of an Indonesian family where he stayed for 3 years. During this time, he was also looked after by their housekeeper, who became his surrogate mother. The family raised Al as their own, taking personal risks to assure he would be safe and survive. His father perished, but his mother was ultimately liberated and reunited with Al when he was 3.5 years old. They emigrated to the US in 1958. The death toll exacted by the Nazi regime on the Jewish children of Europe is one of the most appalling chapters in the history of the Holocaust. The Nazis targeted all Jews for death, but the mortality rate for children was especially high. Among the small number of European children still alive at the end of the Holocaust, thousands had survived because they were hidden. With identities disguised and often physically concealed from the outside world, these youngsters faced constant fear and danger. Those who hid these children lived in constant fear of being found and murdered by the Nazis. As Dr. Munzer said, we hear all about all the horrors of the Holocaust, and we certainly want to avoid those horrors from reoccurring. But there's another important lesson which comes from the family that rescued me. They took tremendous risks, and their story is one of two very simple people standing up to evil and doing the right thing. Al still maintains a close relationship to the Indonesian family's children and grandchildren. Their mother and father were honored by Yad Vashem as righteous among the nations. The Holocaust has many lessons, Dr. Munzer has said. It shows what can happen when there is discrimination and hate, and how they can progress to actual murder. That's one of the things, the terrible things that happened during the Holocaust. Dr. Munzer is a distinguished Jewish community leader who has dedicated his life to Holocaust remembrance. He is a volunteer at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, where he has worked to translate diaries from Dutch into English for a 5-volume series called Jewish Responses to Persecution. He has shared stories of his survival through the museum's first-person series to groups of judges, law enforcement officers, members of the armed forces, high schools, and college students. He is also a sought-after speaker through the JCRC Speakers Bureau. Dr. Munzer is a retired pulmonologist, Holocaust survivor, Jewish leader, philanthropist, and Air Force veteran. He has devoted his life to the practice of medicine and also sharing his story of survival and providing leadership and financial support to both Jewish and non-Jewish organizations. He was director of pulmonary medicine at Washington Adventist Hospital, president of the American Lung Association, and was involved both nationally and internationally on tobacco control. He serves on the board of the Edlovich DC JCC, American Friends of the Technion, and Cambodian Living Arts, which is devoted to bringing healing and reconciliation through music and the arts to people ravaged by atrocities and genocide. It is my great pleasure now to turn the program over to him. Thank you, Dr. Munzer, for being there and for your lifelong commitment to the Jewish people.
I deeply appreciate the invitation of the Jewish Community Council of Greater Washington to participate in today's Yom Ha'Shoah observance. I applaud the JCRC's commitment since its inception in 1938, a year fraught, especially for Jews living in Europe, to promote social justice, to combat anti-Semitism and other forms of hatred, and to serve as a link to communities of different faiths. I was born during the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands, and I survived the Holocaust because a Dutch-Indonesian family and their Indonesian Muslim nanny risked their lives to save a 9-month-old Jewish baby, making it possible for that baby to be with you today. This Yom HaShoah sadly finds the hallmarks of civilized society that we had prayed for after the Holocaust: tolerance, diversity, dignity, and a respect for all human beings under siege around the world, and even here in the nation's capital. Who could ever have imagined a mob brandishing a Nazi flag, desecrating the Capitol Rotunda, the very place where every Yom HaShoah, the pledge made after the Holocaust, never again was reaffirmed. And lest we think that the invasion of the Capitol would be a call to reason, anti-Semitic and other hateful tropes continue to be spread and have been espoused even by members of our body politic. My parents were born in Eastern Europe, my father in a small town called Kanchiga, and my mother in a neighboring town called Rimanov. They immigrated to the Netherlands to escape anti-Semitism and to explore opportunities in a country that had welcomed Jews for hundreds of years. My father was the first to arrive in the Netherlands and started a men's clothing business in The Hague. My mother followed him a few years later, and they were married in December 1932, just before Adolf Hitler came to power in neighboring Germany. My father's business flourished, and my parents made many new friends, many of them not Jewish. And in July 1936, they celebrated the birth of their first child, my sister, Eva. She was followed in November 1938 by my sister, Leah, another happy occasion, but marred by news of Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, when the full fury of anti-Semitism was unleashed just a few hundred miles away in neighboring Germany. But still, my parents felt safe in the Netherlands. All that changed May 10th, 1940, when Germany invaded the Netherlands and installed the Nazi government of occupation, bringing with it a host of restrictions, humiliations, and threats directed to the Jewish community. In early 1941, my mother realized she was pregnant again. Her obstetrician told her that it would be immoral to bring another Jewish life into the world and urged her to have an abortion. But my mother ignored her doctor's advice, and so I was born at home without the obstetrician, November 23rd, 1941. 8 days later, the family gathered in our living room to celebrate my Brit Milah, my circumcision ceremony, the first milestone in a Jewish life. The two small photographs of the event have a very special meaning because my mother was to keep them on her body through her stay subsequently in 12 concentration camps. She feared that if she ever lost these photographs, it would mean that I had been killed. Fortunately, I survived, my mother survived, and the photographs survived, and they are now part of the collection of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. In August 1942, when I was about 8 months old, my father, like many other Jewish men, received a summons to report for labor duty, which meant going to a concentration camp. The summons was a sign of imminent danger, which forced our family, like many others, to go into hiding. My sisters were placed with two very devout Catholic women who lived next door to us, and I was entrusted to a neighbor across the street, Ali Matna. My parents went into hiding in a psychiatric hospital, my father pretending to be a patient, my mother a nurse. Ali Matna thought I would be safer with the family of her younger sister, Yurina, where the presence of a baby would be less conspicuous. Unfortunately, Yurina had a neighbor who was a member of the NSB, the Dutch Nazi Party. And that is why I finally ended up with Ali Matna's former husband, Jole Matna. Jole Matna was born in what was then a Dutch colony, the Netherlands East Indies, now called Indonesia. Jole became my papa. The three Matna children, Willy, Davy, and Robbie, my siblings, and Mima Saima, the Indonesian nanny who had cared for them, now became my mother. Mima was never taught to read or write and did not speak a word of the Dutch language, only her native Indonesian tongue. but she had a heart of gold and cared for me as if I were her own. I slept in Mima's bed, and she kept a knife under her pillow, vowing to kill any Nazi who might try to come and get me. Because I was in the house illegally, there were no food ration coupons for me, and for 3 long years, she and the members of the Malta family shared their own meager rations with me. They made sure I never came near a window for fear that some passers-by might see a very different looking child. There were times when the house was being searched and I was told to hide in a closet. But I thought it was just a game of hide and seek, and I remember playing with the Christmas ornaments that were stored in the closet. There were also times when I was hungry, especially during the last winter of the war, when almost all that was left to eat in the Netherlands were tulip bulbs. But what I remember most of my 3 years with the Malta family was love and laughter. Sadly, my sisters met an entirely different fate. After a year with the Catholic neighbors, a priest found what he assumed would be a safer family willing to hide them. Rosa Mazurowski had had a dream, she told him, where the Virgin told her to take Jewish children into hiding. But a few months later, her husband, J.J. Scherber, denounced his wife and my sisters to the Nazis. Rosa was taken to a concentration camp in Vught and then to Ravensbrück, where she developed typhus but survived. My sisters, Eva and Leah, however, were taken to Auschwitz, where they were killed February 11th, 1944. They were 7 and 5 years old. 2 of 1.5 million children killed in the Holocaust. The transport that took them to Auschwitz included 250 unaccompanied children. It is only recently that I found out that one adult on that transport was my father's youngest brother, Elisha, or Emil. He was fit and only in his early 30s and probably could have survived. But he chose to remain with my sisters, whom I knew he loved dearly. And so my uncle Emil was killed along with my sisters on that same day, February 11th, 1944. My parents only succeeded in hiding in the psychiatric hospital for 3 months. On Christmas Day, 1942, they enjoyed a surprise visit with my sisters. But 1 week later, on New Year's Eve, my parents and 250 other Jews who had been hiding in the hospital were arrested by the SS. My parents were deported first to 2 camps in the Netherlands and then to Auschwitz. My father remained in Auschwitz for 6 months, where he was put to work in a coal mine, supplying fuel for the IG Farben factory. And then, as the Soviet army approached, he was taken to a succession of concentration camps in Austria, Mauthausen, Gösen, Steyr, and finally to a camp high in the Austrian Alps called Ebensee. There, the prisoners worked in abandoned salt mines assembling V-2 rockets for the German army. Heavy labor, no food, no sunlight. My father witnessed liberation by the US Army, May 1945. But he was so debilitated that he died 2 months later, still in Ebensee, and never having re-established contact with his family. July 25th, 1945. Miraculously, my mother survived Auschwitz and then a stay in a camp called Reichenbach and a whole series of death marches that took her to 9 other camps. She was liberated in April 1945, and she and I were reunited August 1st, 1945. It is the first clear memory I have. I was asleep in one of the back rooms of the house when my foster sister Davy came to get me and carried me into the living room where the whole family was gathered in a circle. I was cranky and unhappy, and so they did what you do with a cranky child. They passed me from lap to lap. But what I remember was that there was one lap I refused to sit in, one woman I kept pushing away. That woman was my mother, but to me, she was a complete stranger. I already had a mother, and that was Mima Saina. My mother thought it best that Mima continued to care for me. But unexpectedly, Mima passed away 2 months later. And that's when I finally bonded with my mother, a bond that lasted until her death, 56 years later, at age 94. I was only 4 years old when I was reunited with my mother, and I had no understanding what had happened to my father and my sisters. I grew up in a world where the absence of a parent or a brother or a sister wasn't unusual, but the norm. It was only gradually that I came to understand what people meant when they shook their heads and said that my father and my sisters sadly had not come back. Sadly, the Holocaust did not spell an end to hate, bigotry, or mass murder. Genocide continues even today. I asked Tole Mada why he risked a life and the lives of his family to save a 9-month-old Jewish baby. His answer was a simple one. What else was I to do? To him, standing up to hate and bigotry wasn't a choice, but a given. That is the lesson I want the world to learn, that even when surrounded by unbridled hate that robbed me of my father and sisters, and hate that took the lives of 6 million Jews and millions of others, it is possible and incumbent on all of us to stand up and do what is right. There is a prayer on the monument of the former Ebensee concentration camp where my father perished. And it reads, to the faithful companions, the heroes and the comrades of 1,000 dead who rest here, and countless others of all nationalities and every faith, brothers and sisters in a common tragic destiny. This is dedicated by an Italian woman who prays that such an incredible sacrifice might turn a human heart to good. Recent events in the United States and around the world add urgency to the prayer of that woman. It falls to all of us to answer her prayer and confront hate in all its ugly forms, and to foster a world that celebrates our common humanity. Thank you.
As we prepare to recite the Kaddish of Remembrance, the special Kaddish that weaves the traditional Kaddish with the names of the camps and the cities of those who perished during the Shoah, we invite you to rise physically and/or spiritually and join together with us. Yitkadal,
Auschwitz,
V'yitkadash,
Sobibor,
Shemei Rabbah,
Warsaw Ghetto,
Be'alma Divrak Yerutei,
Baba Yar,
V'yamlich Malchutei,
Kishinev,
V'chayechon Uvyomechon,
Mauthausen,
Uv'chayei,
Dachau,
Dechol Beit,
Vilna,
Yisrael,
Majdanek,
Ba'agala Uvizman Kariv,
Buchenwald,
Ve'imru,
Amen.
Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabba Mevarach Le'alam Olamei Almaya, Yitbarach V'yishtabach,
Mayence,
V'yitpa'ar V'yitramam V'yitnaseh,
Theresen,
V'yitadar,
Drancy,
V'yit'aleh V'yithalal,
Bergen-Belsen,
Shmei Dekudsha B'richu,
Ravensbrück,
Le'ela Min Kol Birchata V'shirata,
Treblinka,
Tushbechata V'nechamata,
Beltitz,
Da'amiran Be'alma,
Bohemia,
Ve'imru, Amen.
Amen.
Yehei Shlama Rabbah,
Lodz,
Min Shemaya,
Gross Rosen,
V'chaim Aleinu,
Riga,
Ve'al Kol Yisrael,
Radom,
Ve'imru, Amen.
Amen,
Oseh Shalom Bimromav,
Traudniki,
Hu Ya'aseh Shalom,
Chelno,
Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael,
Sachsenhausen,
Ve'imru,
Amen.
Amen.
Sag nicht keinmal, als du gehst am letzten Weg. Chotschim den Leine verstellen neue Tag. Kommen wird noch unser ausgewenkte Show. Es wird abholt und unser Trott, wir seinen da. Kommen wird noch unser ausgewenkte Show. Es wird abholt und unser Trott, wir seinen da. Al nato Sag nicht keinmal, als du gehst dem letzten Weg. Chosh himlen leine verstellen neue Tag. Kommen wird noch unser Haus gebänkte Schau. Es wird erbeugt an unser Trott, wir seien da. Kommen wird noch unser Haus gebänkte Schau. Es wird erbeugt an unser Trott, wir seien da.
My name is Ron Halber, and I'm the Executive Director of the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Washington. The JCRC has organized the community-wide Yom Ha'Shoah commemoration for decades. It is a day that brings us together as a community to honor our survivors, those who perished, and those who fought to liberate our people. It is always, for me personally, one of the most important and moving days of the year. I'm deeply grateful to our survivors, their children and grandchildren for participating in our commemoration. Throughout the year, the JCRC brings Holocaust survivors from our Speakers Bureau to local schools to speak to students about their lives and the importance of combating hatred. We train our young leaders to educate their peers about what it means to be a Jewish teenager today as part of our student-to-student program. We fight anti-Semitism and bigotry in our schools and communities, and we lobby in 3 jurisdictions to increase Holocaust education and secure government funding for the agencies that provide critical services for Washington area survivors. As time passes and lack of awareness about the Shoah continues to escalate, we are training the children of survivors, 2Gs, and grandchildren of survivors, 3Gs, to carry on their parents' legacies by sharing their families' Shoah narratives with the next generation. Thank you to the clergy, musicians, speakers, and JCRC leadership and staff for bringing us together for today's meaningful program. Thank you to our Holocaust Commission members and its co-chairs, Ellen Blaylock, Ira Barkfield, Albert Bloomfield, and Ron Paul, for their continued support of our Holocaust initiatives. Thank you to our keynote speaker, Dr. Alfred L. Munzer, for his inspiring remarks. We are deeply grateful. Thank you to the elected officials and the students from the Charles E. Smith Jewish Day School, Melvin J. Berman Hebrew Academy, Gesher Jewish Day School, and Milton Gottesman Jewish Day School for participating in the reading of the names. Unto every name there is a person, pays a tribute to those who perished by remembering that each of them was an individual, each life was precious, and that their lives have not and will not be forgotten. Today, and together, the Jewish community of Greater Washington has demonstrated strength, unity, and hope throughout the years during times of great joy and deep sorrow. Let us conclude this beautiful commemoration on a hopeful note as we join together in the singing of Hatikvah.
Hatikvah